Dr. Sherr, welcome back. Round two.
It's been too long, man. Thanks for having me back, Boomer.
How have you been? Good?
Oh, lockdown, but doing well.
Yeah, I guess for those listening to this right now, in terms of recording time period, we're talking COVID, and I'm sure this will be released before the end of the COVID experience, but uh, you know, who knows where we'll be in the next couple of months.
Regardless, we're all going to know how it felt to be at this time, living through a very interesting point in history. So,
Yeah. Shelter in place may be the phrase of the year, that's for sure.
yeah, it's one of them.
But today we're going to talk a little bit about something different. I want to kind of go into depth with you about something that I know you're passionate about, involved in quite a bit, cognitive enhancement. And specifically would like to talk about this wonderful world of nootropics. Now, you're directly involved in it, and I just have to understand, like, how did you come to the whole world of nootropics in the first place?
Well, I think like most kids in college, you want to feel like you can actually concentrate. So I went to UCLA in Los Angeles.
There's plenty of distraction in LA.
There's plenty of distractions in Los Angeles. And I didn't drink any coffee at all before I went to college. And that was my first nootropic, right? My first nootropic was coffee, and sometimes a lot of it. And I even had sugar in my coffee. I did soy milk in my coffee. I mean, this is like funny stuff now thinking back at what I did.
Do you have like do you ever remember like what peak coffee was for you?
What peak coffee?
Yeah, so like maximum number of cups.
I was never a huge coffee drinker. I would say like maximum for me was probably, this didn't come into medical school until later. It was probably about 3, I would say. But I usually, over the years, developed a very large coffee drinking habit in the morning. So my first coffee was not a small coffee. So what I mean by large was size. So my first coffee was large. I used to mess around with espresso back in medical school. But I really didn't explore anything outside of caffeine until I learned more about nootropics in general, actually, after the work I was doing in hyperbaric medicine. Hyperbaric therapy, which is one of the fields that I work in, is a nootropic in itself. It can help with cognitive enhancement, optimization. It helps with blood flow. So you can think better in the chamber. And then I had some interesting conversations with people like Mr. Dave Asprey and others back in 2013, well, saying, I want to use this as a nootropic. I'm like, well, what's a nootropic? So I didn't know what a nootropic was in 2013. And so I met Dave, actually. And he's like, oh, and he told me all about the work that he was doing. This is when he just had Bulletproof Coffee. I think it was before his first book. And it was during that time that I started understanding that there was these other compounds that you could use to help stimulate your brain to function better. And it worked really well within my life at the time, understanding that these existed, because I was going on like having 3 kids at that point. Now I'm on number 4, and I'm done after that, by the way. More kids. I have 3 girls and a boy. Everybody's less than 9 years old in my house at the moment.
Wow.
So yeah, having the ability to have a brain that functions, not only for the work I do, but also for the family that I have, was very important to me. So I started exploring some additional nootropics. I started with some of the racetams. I thought those were interesting. I liked them. I didn't like them that much because sometimes they'd make me feel a little bit too jittery. I started then exploring nicotine itself, which I really did like because I liked how it kind of gave me a little burst of cognitive enhancement, a little bit of a cognitive boost. I spoke better. I thought better. I was better at thinking laterally as well. So I started working with nicotine a little bit. And then it was from there that I didn't do too much exploring of some of the nootropic formulas out there, but I did some. And because I really felt that I was doing well, I was focusing on my cellular foundation, doing the work in health optimization medicine, and you're aware of this as well, Boomer, and making sure that I had the ability to harness energy well at the cellular level. I was getting into the chamber, which was helping my cognitive capacity, doing exercise, which is a great nootropic in itself. And so I didn't think about, combinations of nootropics up until relatively recently, and how you could stack things together in a way that could optimize, cognitive performance.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about 2 years ago when I met Dr. Ted Achacoso, when he is I think the consummate stacker of biohacks in a very physiologic and in a very, I think, reasonable way, because he's a physician like I am. And so he was able to look at pharmacology and say, well, how can you stack pharmacology, micro dosing certain compounds or precision dosing certain compounds to bring it together in a safe way, where you can see the potential benefits of larger doses of certain of these types of compounds in a smaller dose synergistic formula. And so that's when Blue Cannatine came about. At first as a gum and then as a troche, which is this sublingual, not sublingual, it's a buccal troche. So it stays in your mouth, it stays in one location. So that was my process, I think. And then now I use that and I fucking love it. That's my usual nootropic, but I still just sometimes use nicotine on its own as well. And then of course, caffeine now I cycle. I don't always have caffeine, but I like it when I have it, and I try to use it as more of a nootropic rather than as a daily crutch.
So let's, before we jump into Blue Cannatine, which I definitely want to spend some time on, 2 questions for you. First, foundationally, before somebody jumps into all that is a nootropic, what or should before they jump in and start taking nootropics, what should they be doing first? What should they be doing right first? Because I think there's a lot of people out there, and I was guilty of this back when Dave Asprey was posting the racetams, and like you used to be able to buy aniracetam in the store, right? And I shipped it over to Singapore, but I wasn't really sleeping very much. What should we foundationally have stacked in place before we start looking for cognitive enhancement?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Boomer. It's really important because the way this company developed Transcriptions, the company that makes Blue Cannatine, was through a health-focused lens. That health-focused lens is called Health Optimization Medicine, and it's a nonprofit company of which I'm the chief operating officer here in the States, and it's part of my concierge wellness practice. I truly feel the foundational wellness perspective is most important to start off with. Because if you don't have the ability to make energy effectively at the cellular level, if you don't have the right vitamins, minerals, nutrients, if you're toxic, if you're inflamed, if your gut has overgrowth, if it's got pathogens in it that are causing leaky gut and other aspects that deregulate your biology, giving nootropics or really trying any supplement without having some of this in context may make things worse, or at the very least make you feel better for a short period of time, but then make you feel worse afterwards. And I'm guilty of this as well. In the past, when I was in residency and when I was working really hard and I wasn't sleeping, just like you, Boomer, trying things like extra caffeine or nicotine or whatever to help me, it would help me for like a minute, but then after that I would feel terrible. And the aniracetams or the racetams in general, same thing. They would help me initially, but then I would feel terrible. I haven't tried them lately as I've been more health optimized because I don't feel like I've needed them. But I do feel like if I would try them now, it would be much better than I did earlier, because my biology, my physiology, my cellular health wasn't as good as it is now, where I've focused on precision dosing supplements to help me focus on my health and my cellular health, my gut health, my immune health, avoiding foods that I know that can inflame me, practicing various practices like meditation and sunlight exposure and grounding to help me, sleeping better, although I'm not always great at that. I do my best with everything going on. But, I'm by no means perfect. But what I try to do is focus on that foundational health on myself, and then with the clients that I work with. And then also that's the focus of Transcriptions, which is we are here as a bottleneck for your path or along your path to foundational health or optimal health. Cognitive function, and going forward, sleep, pain, and other ways to help you function at a higher capacity. But if you're not focusing on some of that foundational work, that cellular work, you may find that these things help you, but they don't help you as much, or in a couple of days you don't feel as good. It's because you don't have that baseline health that's going to sustain you.
Second question before we dive in: caffeine cycling. How do you look at that for yourself and for other people that may be interested in that?
Well, caffeine's a drug, and caffeine, if you have a lot of it, you build up tolerance to it. And at some point, especially, that tolerance can get to the point where you just don't have any real caffeine effect anymore, no stimulation effect. I mean, I was getting to the point about a year ago where I could have a cup of coffee at dinner, or a regular cup of coffee, and go to bed 3 hours later, right? So so you basically, your receptors are so tolerant to caffeine that there's no use to having it. So having caffeine cycling is helpful because it gives you that ability to virginize your receptors to caffeine. Let's call it.
I love it.
So when you virginize your receptors, you prune them to some degree, so there won't be as many on the synaptic clefts, right? So then, as a result of that, there's less places for it to be taken up. But as a result of the stimulus, you're going to have more that can actually work. And so it's sort of this virginizing of receptors that helps with everything. It's not just caffeine, but caffeine's a really important one. That's the same thing with a lot of different nootropics, right? A lot of these things you want to cycle over time and come in and on and off of, so that you don't build up tolerance to. And then, of course, with tolerance, there also comes withdrawal. And caffeine withdrawal, as many of us know, it's not going to kill you, but it's not fun, right? So being able to do this in a cycling way can help you with withdrawal and tolerance aspects as well, and help with the effect of caffeine, which is a fantastic nootropic.
Typical when you cycle off, is it 4 to 6 weeks, or how long? Any particular time period?
For me, it depends on a lot of factors, but I think in general, what I recommend is somewhere around there: 4 to 6 weeks off, 4 to 6 weeks on, or even just weekly on and off is fine too. I like to think about caffeine now as a nootropic, as more as something that I have to have every day. So I think about it. People love their coffee, and I completely resonate with that. I'll have decaf coffees most mornings just because it's hot and it tastes like coffee.
Yeah.
And then I can stack things inside of my coffee, right?
Yeah.
But it's not caffeine that's doing it. It's it's the coconut milk, or it's the L-theanine, or it's the whatever else I'm going to put in my coffee that day, my mushroom formulas or whatever. So I use it as a delivery device, and not so much for the caffeine itself all the time. But then I go cycles and I say, okay, caffeine today or caffeine tomorrow. And I've realized over time, for me, I don't technically need caffeine in the morning. I need caffeine if I'm going to have it in the afternoon, when I get, sometimes in the afternoon, we get that sort of lull.
Yeah.
So anyway, for everybody, it's different, but I like, also for the hormonal effects of caffeine too, which is important. Caffeine does, deplete you in neurotransmitters as well. So it's important to replete those. We like to test them, of course, if we can, to see what you need or where you're depleted in. But it's an important one as well. It also can decrease your melatonin production and other things as well. So.
So we know we're going to call this episode "Virginizing Receptors," but
Awesome.
let's go into Blue Cannatine, because I've tried it a lot and love it. We've covered caffeine quite extensively already, and so we've had both yourself and Dr. Ted on the show before. To recap the ingredients: methylene blue, caffeine, hemp crystals, and then also methylene blue, caffeine, hemp crystals, and what's the last one that I'm missing? Nicotine.
Nicotine, yes.
Yeah, of course. And so let's go through kind of each of these, just in terms of, maybe we can talk a little bit about dosing, but I would love to talk specifically. Let's talk about methylene blue first. Fascinating. Yeah, exactly. Look, there he is. Sporting. Yeah.
I don't know if you have video for this, but
we do have video, and the video will be released.
Nice.
And so that would be half Smurf mode for those looking.
Indeed.
For okay. So do you have a preference on half Smurf mode versus full Smurf mode?
So technically, the right way to use methylene blue is in half Smurf mode, because
Okay.
that means you kept it on the same side of your mouth for the entire time that you had it dissolving.
Okay.
Now, we don't discourage full Smurf or other types of Smurf, subtle Smurf, etc.
Mhm.
I do discourage teeth Smurf. You know, the teeth Smurf doesn't look all that great if you have
Yeah, so that would be the chomping on the
the
actual.
chomping. So
Yeah.
yeah, no chomping,
Okay.
no braces, no Invisalign, please. We've learned the hard way
Oh,
to tell people that. You don't want to use Invisalign. If you have Invisalign, do not use methylene blue. It is
Mhm.
a stain. Okay, it is a dye. Um, we can talk about methylene blue first. I think
Yeah,
it's
let's dive into
intriguing.
methylene blue because you've
Yeah,
heard of it in like aquariums even. But like how does
right.
methylene blue benefit a human being?
So the history of methylene blue is super, super interesting. It's the
Yeah.
first drug that was actually registered with the FDA. And I think the year was like 1897.
Wow.
So a long time ago. And methylene blue's got a lot of different properties. It has antifungal properties. It has antibacterial properties. It was a treatment from malaria, actually. So it's got antiparasitic properties. We think it has antiviral properties, especially with combinations of various types of light, at least. And before antibiotics, you give methylene blue for urinary tract infection. Before antifungals and antiparasitics, you were giving methylene blue for for fungal infections and for malaria. It was also noted to be a mild antidepressant because it had what's called MAOI properties, which
Hmm.
is monoamine oxidase inhibition properties. So this is a type of these are types of pathways that are involved in what we think is depression, in depression itself. And so it was used in psychiatry not only for that component, but it was also a way for clinicians to make sure that their patients were taking the drugs. Because if they added methylene blue to another drug, it would make their urine blue. So as a result of that, they could test and see whether people were taking the drugs or not.
Hmm.
So a beneficial side effect, I don't know, but it's a side effect nonetheless of blue urine. So if you have methylene blue, if you ingest it, the higher the dose, the more blue you're going to have of your urine. A higher dose, a very high dose, is going to turn your shit blue too. You know, blue Smurf shits is what people like to say. Um,
But
but
that's a pretty high dose, right? Like
that's a
you're
very
not.
high dose. Yeah, for Smurf shits, it's a high dose, very high
Yeah.
dose. So methylene blue, what's actually happening is very interesting. It has lots of different properties, but in its essence, it is its ability to actually allow your cells to make energy. It acts like oxygen at the cellular level. So on the electron transport chain, you have electrons that are shooting through it and that are usually being captured by oxygen, so that are being received by oxygen. And in this way, you can make energy. Those electrons being transduced from the inside of the mitochondria to the outside, they basically make an engine work that produces ATP, or the currency of energy in our cells. Oxygen is the final electron receptor. Methylene blue can do the same thing. And so it's used clinically in the medical field now for something called methylhemoglobinemia, which also can happen in carbon monoxide poisoning, where you have this inability to use oxygen because it's being tied to the hemoglobin molecules in some way. But you can use methylene blue as a curative because it allows you to still maintain your production of energy,
Hmm.
even if oxygen's not available at the most or at the significant quantities. At the same time as it being an oxygen replacer, or something that can enhance oxygen's effect by producing more the ability to accept electrons, it also has antioxidant properties and actually can donate electrons at the same time, very interestingly. We also think that light itself can activate methylene blue and make it work better. We think UVC light specifically, but
Hmm.
also probably other wavelengths of light as well.
Yeah. So UVC is interesting, and I want to double click on that. But is infrared also, because we've got some friends in the space that are playing around with it in infrared. What do we know about light and methylene blue?
So we don't know what spectrums are best so
Okay.
far, but we do know at least about UVC.
Okay.
Their UVC light has been known for many years to be antiviral.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some studies that have been published on various viruses like coronavirus and others, where if you irradiate the blood with UVC and methylene blue, you can see significant antiviral properties. Those doses of methylene blue are higher than what's in Blue Cannatine.
What's the dose that they talk about in those
So it's
studies?
not exactly clear
Mm-hmm.
at this point. So that's something that we're exploring as a company to think about, what products, could we make available. But right now, we make no claims at all that Blue Cannatine has any antiviral
Of course.
properties because it has a small dose of methylene blue. It's 5 milligrams of
Mm-hmm.
methylene blue. We think that the doses, most of these studies have been done outside of the body, so in vitro, not in
Mm-hmm.
vivo. So it's difficult to kind of approximate, but we're looking into this for sure. From a light perspective, we know for sure UVC, but we don't know about red light. We don't know about regular spectrum light, and we don't know about the higher spectrums either at this point. So this is something that needs to be explored. We don't know, but there is definitely some significant interest in how light, how it actually may, and the Dr. Jack Cruz guys, and Dr. Jack Cruz talks about this a little bit too, how there may be some capabilities of methylene blue to protect ourselves from bad light as well, which I don't quite understand yet, but that's another one that I'm very interested in exploring. So we think methylene blue is neuroprotective from the antioxidant capabilities. We think it's energy producing because of its ability to accept electrons. And we think it might work in combination with light and maybe other things to have other antiviral, antifungal, and antibacterial qualities that are not being used very much in the medical world right now, but have been in the past.
Mm-hmm. I have a family history with Alzheimer's and things, and one of the neuroprotective benefits, or at least I would love to hear your thoughts on methylene blue potentially for early onset Alzheimer's. Obviously not making any claims, but I know there's been some papers out there.
Yeah, super intriguing stuff. And I think, again, it has to do with the ability to maintain energy production. Because as we get older, our mitochondria also deteriorate. And these are our batteries, the powerhouses, as they're called. And if they're not working well, those cells are going to deteriorate and degenerate. And the most common places that they happen are really deep inside the brain and the frontal lobe. And so that senile dementia is the frontal lobe, right? Where you don't remember what your keys are, what you had for breakfast, but you remember what you did 50 years ago on the beach in Singapore, right? Or something. So you have this ability to remember those things from the long term, but in the short term, the short-term storage stuff goes. And so we think that methylene blue is just allowing maintenance of energy production. And the dosing for that is very interesting. It looks like somewhere around 16 milligrams of an activated form, or not an activated form, but a little bit of a different form of methylene blue. Actually, I'm sorry. That activated form is actually, the dose looks to be about 8 milligrams. And then the inactivated form looks to be somewhere maybe about double that. And what I mean by inactivated, I just means it has to be activated in the body versus it coming in the activated form itself as you're ingesting it.
So what are the common ways so other than Blue Cannatine, ingesting methylene blue now, do you just buy it online? Like, that seems a little bit dangerous to me. What's the easiest way for people to get a hold of it?
Well, you were alluding to this before. You could get fish tank cleaner, but that's not pharmaceutical grade, right? So fish tank cleaner does have methylene blue in it. A lot of laboratory bench work uses methylene blue as a stain. It's difficult to find pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. And we went to the ends of the earth to find pharmaceutical grade methylene blue for this product because we didn't want any impurities. We wanted the potency to be exactly as we set it to be. This goes back to what I said about Dr. Ted and learning about this formula, that we have a precision dosed pharmaceutical grade product that has certificates of analysis for every single ingredient. It's difficult to find pharmaceutical grade methylene blue. It's just plain and simple. And then if it doesn't have that pharmaceutical grade, it's possible that it has impurities like heavy metals or molds and other things. And so it's difficult for me to recommend any specific place to get it, honestly, because we looked and it's difficult to find. But if you feel comfortable, it comes in various ways. It comes in liquid form. It comes in capsule form, although that's not common yet, but it's going to be, I think. And then it also comes in IV forms, which is very interesting.
Interesting. Ooh, IV form methylene blue coming to your biohacking clinic near you.
Yeah, they're looking at to use it for cancer, actually.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So just to sum up for people, methylene blue, if you were to take it by yourself, what kind of benefits do you think people could expect from it?
Well, it's an energy producer, right? It helps make ATP at the cellular level. It tends to concentrate both in your brain and in your heart. So think about ways that you can capitalize on your body's ability to produce more energy in your brain and your heart. And that's where methylene blue seems to have the biggest effect.
Amazing. I want to dispel some rumors on nicotine, because we have a lot of people here who have been drilled by the Philip Morris lawsuits of the world that nicotine is evil, must be punished, and will, if you touch it, you're going to hell, kind of thing. Let's talk about nicotine. First things first, is nicotine addictive?
So yes, nicotine is absolutely addictive. However, the delivery of nicotine will basically tell you how addictive it's going to be. If you smoke or vape nicotine, it's going to be much more addictive because it hits your bloodstream very fast. As soon as you breathe in the nicotine, whether you smoke it or you vape it, it gets into your red blood cells, into your circulation very, very fast. And all of a sudden, you get a quick hit of nicotine either way. In addition to smoking, you're not just smoking nicotine. You're not just vaping nicotine. You're also smoking and vaping other products that enhance the addictive qualities of both nicotine, vaped or smoked. And this has been very well studied. And we think it's some of these additional products that are inside cigarettes or inside vaping products, very similar, actually some of the flavorings and others that are inside the vaping products that are actually making nicotine as addictive as it is. There are some pretty good studies to show this. So when you're not vaping or smoking nicotine, especially if you're not using it with the additional products that are inside of a cigarette or vaping, the ability to get addicted to nicotine is absolutely still possible, but it's not as easy to do. Now, people worry about chewing tobacco, for example, or dipping. Again, that's just not nicotine. That's the other products that are inside of nicotine or with the nicotine as well. What we've done in Blue Cannatine and what you can get as a nicotine replacement is straight nicotine. Okay, the nicotine we use in Blue Cannatine is it's synthetically derived. It's not from tobacco, and that's important as well. Not so much from an addictive perspective, but just from a clean perspective. We have a clean product here. The nicotine is also pharmaceutical grade, which is important. And when you are using it in a way that we've developed it in a slow release lozenge, buccal lozenge, you are getting the effect of nicotine that's rising over 15 to 30 minutes and not instantly. So as a result of that, you have a much lower chance of getting any addictive qualities to nicotine because of that slow release formula. So the faster you get hit with nicotine, the faster you feel it, the higher the addictive quality, no doubt about it. So I always say, I don't think anybody should be smoking or vaping anything because of how fast it hits you. There are some exceptions to that rule, especially if you have a lot of pain or a lot of discomfort. There are ways to get quick acting, so that's good. But in general, nicotine is going to be addicting no matter what formula you have, but it drops down exponentially the addictive qualities as you stop vaping and smoking.
Nicotine, one of the people you and I have had coffee with before claimed that you had to train yourself to have the nicotine hit faster. Do you believe that? Like, as in, let's say I have the Nicorette spray here because I live in Europe. Do I need to start training myself? Is there an onboarding period to notice the effects of nicotine?
I mean, there's always the question of priming receptors, right? In the sense, if you prime receptors it's sort of like the double effect kind of deal, right? Where you have a little bit, then you have more. There is some logic to that. I haven't seen that specifically for nicotine and the nicotinic receptors and how that has an effect on the neurotransmitters that are released as a result of the acetylcholine that is stimulated from the nicotinic receptors. But it's possible. It's something that I haven't explored myself. But I would definitely encourage people to think about it and do some research on their own and to see if that does have a significant effect. I mean, myself personally, I haven't noticed that particular effect. I've noticed it being best used in short bursts. Nicotine for for a 30-minute or an hour period of time is it's pretty short acting. So what I like about the formula that we've developed is that it allows it to be more longer acting, as we've given other ingredients in there that sort of round it out with the hemp crystals, beatifically derived, as we say, and even having the methylene blue in there, helping sort of maintain energy function or energy capacity over a longer period of time. But it's definitely interesting. I definitely think it's worth exploring.
So let's go into nicotine specifically and how it acts, because we've talked about why it may or may not be addictive in certain cases, but let's talk about how it acts and kind of the benefits that you mentioned, because you mentioned acetylcholine, right? So let's go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so nicotine is a fantastic nootropic, and it's actually been studied on its own for Alzheimer's disease and for mild cognitive delay, or mild cognitive impairment, I should say, not mild cognitive delay. That's in kids. Anyway, so, it hasn't been studied in kids. No, nicotine is a drug in the U.S. over 21 years of age. But anyway, we know it's a nootropic, and it's been studied in academic literature in this capacity. And the reason is that it works on many neurotransmitters all at the same time through its effect on cholinergic receptors specifically. And as a result of producing more acetylcholine, you get more neurotransmitters released. You get more dopamine, more norepinephrine, more epinephrine. And as a result of that, you see this stimulatory effect. And your brain is just functioning better. You're revving up your ability to make energy. So again, this is important why we talk about why you need to be able to make energy efficiently. But revving up the ability of your brain to have more energetic potential, more energetic currency. It's also going to constrict blood vessels down a little bit. It's a stimulant, and that's what all stimulants do. So it's important to know what your risks are for that. If you have any cardiac history, if you have any pulmonary history, these are reasons why you may want to be considering maybe not having nicotine. But in general, it's a very safe drug. If you have a history of any neurocognitive issues, history of strokes or seizures or things like that, you need to make sure that you kind of aware of what your doses are of these things, or if you should take them. Low dose, it's actually very safe in almost all of those categories. But it's still something you should think about and talk to your doctor about before you use it. But nicotine has also this ability. What's interesting, not only does it vasoconstrict, it seems to dilate blood vessels in our brain that are very specific to thinking and cognitive capacity, which is kind of paradoxical in my initial, because you wouldn't think that it would have the ability to do both. And I'm not exactly sure how it does that. But in the thinking areas of our brain, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the hippocampus, those areas, there tends to be even some vasodilation, which is very interesting.
So, all right. So we have nicotine as potentially a cognitive enhancer, so to speak. But one of the things, let's talk a little bit more on, let's go into CBD now. Do you think what am I leaving out of the picture on nicotine right now that we need to cover?
I think what's important, we've mostly covered. I think the idea that nicotine can be used as a nootropic, and it's not scary if it's not smoked or vaped, and used in a precision way, is a novel one for a lot of people. Not in the biohacker space, but outside of that, I think it's very much a novel idea. I think what's important to know is that there are risks for it, but they're mild, and you can screen yourself out of those very quickly. But the benefits can be dramatic. I think what's interesting about it for me is verbal fluidity, I find, with nicotine. So like I just had nicotine by itself, like my brain is just, I'm just saying words and things are happening and I'm not stumbling. I'm not saying
Yeah, I'm on fire, right? It's just,
yeah. So it's got this really amazing ability to do that. And so I think you covered most of it. I think, from a physiologic perspective, I think we covered most of it too.
let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned small versus large dose with nicotine. Is there a concrete sort of maybe justification of what constitutes small versus large dose? And I think it's worth clarifying for people just how much nicotine is in Blue Cannatine.
So there's 1 milligram in Blue Cannatine.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 milligram of nicotine is a very low dose compared to a cigarette, for example, that has 12 milligrams of tobacco-derived nicotine,
Yeah.
of course. Now, how much of that nicotine are you getting? Somewhere between 3 and 5 milligrams, maybe up to 6 milligrams of nicotine per cigarette. So it's a much lower dose. Most nicotine replacement is upwards about 4 milligrams or 2 milligrams per piece of gum. Everybody's dose is going to be a little bit different. My dose is 1 milligram. Typically, some are 2. Dr. Ted is a half. He's sensitive. He's a sensitive guy.
Yeah, I'm 1. So.
And so for everybody, it's going to be different. It also depends on how much of it you're using. If you're using a lot more of it, you will create tolerance to it. Now, this secondary effect where you have a little bit, then have more, I'm not sure what that would look like but everybody can experiment. But in general, I find for most people, like 1 to 2 milligrams is their typical dose for nicotine to help them with cognitive enhancement.
And you mentioned verbal fluidity, right? And so verbal fluidity being one of the things that I absolutely love from Blue Cannatine. Is that generally from nicotine, or is it just I guess it is the combination of the ingredients as well, too.
Yeah, it's hard to say, what is the most important. I would say that nicotine likely is, if in my feeling, if I had to make an educated guess, I would say that nicotine is probably the one that's doing it the most. But I would say that what's nice about the formula having the hemp crystals beatifically derived, the CBD, is that it rounds it out so that nicotine can sometimes feel edgy, like you have almost too much stimuli, you're like too stimulated. And sometimes as a result of that, it can have a detriment to your verbal fluidity, your ability to think and to think more laterally. What's nice about having the CBD or the hemp crystals beatifically derived is that it rounds it out. So you feel this lift, but you also feel it in a more sort of expansive and, I think, slow release way, where you don't feel like all of a sudden you just have so much in your mind you can't think and you're focused on, you're more like, this is how I think, this is how I speak, this is how I feel, and you can get those words to come out of your mouth and they just kind of come. And then you can think laterally too, so that you're not just so hyper focused that you can't get out of the tunnel. And I think sometimes with nicotine that does happen to me too. That's what I think is happening in this formula versus just nicotine on its own.
And so the hemp crystals, do they serve predominantly as that rounding off, or are they also, you mentioned something of an extension of the nicotine. How does that exactly happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think it definitely rounds it off. So you don't have this initial burst. You have this more rounding of the onset of action, which I think is really important for what we're doing, because it gives you this rise up. And then also when you're done with your limitless ride with Blue Cannatine, on the other side of it, you don't feel this come down. You don't feel this withdrawal effect.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with CBD. I also think, CBD or hemp crystals beatifically derived is also neuroprotective. It also has antioxidant capabilities. So I think it's protecting you at the same time as you have all these neurotransmitters being released and stimulated with nicotine and caffeine on board. So I think part of it is this neuroprotective effect. Now, as far as it extending it, I think it's just because you have this extension related to the CBD being on board. And as a result of that, you just have this extension of this ability to sort of maintain that. I'm not exactly sure what's happening physiologically yet. I think what we're going to see, though, as we do more testing of this, Boomer, like from a neurologic perspective, when we do EEGs on people and we look at their default mode networks and we look at their central executive networks, which is our network that allows us to get shit done. our DMN, our default mode network, is our story and who we are and what we're doing and the stories we tell ourselves every day. I think what we're going to see is that we have the DMN go down and the central executive network kind of ramp itself up so that you're able to do this, but you still have the more lateral thinking capabilities. So, but we have to do some more testing, which has been on hold given, lockdown, but hopefully soon.
I can't lock myself on an EEG right now, or get myself on an EEG. Drug interactions and Blue Cannatine. Anything that people should be aware of?
So the biggest ones to consider are if you're taking an antidepressant that has SSRI components to it, whether it be an SSRI directly or if it's a drug that has a combination. The combination with that and also the methylene blue, it may cause, although our dosing is extremely low and is extremely unlikely, there's a risk of something called serotonin syndrome, which we don't want you to get. That's why our dosing doesn't allow for more than 4 troches in a day. As long as you stay below 4 troches, you really are safe. But if you're taking any of those medications, we highly recommend either you decide not to take Blue Cannatine or you talk to your doctor before taking it. Other things just to consider: if you're stimulating your body, if you have stimulants on board, this is not like it's amphetamines or anything crazy, but like we're talking stimulants like caffeine and nicotine, you want to make sure that your body is healthy enough for stimulants. So you have your heart functioning is okay, that your brain function is okay, in the sense that you don't have uncontrolled, seizure disorders, or if you have cardiac issues like previous heart attacks or cardiomyopathies, and also in combinations with illegal drugs like alcohol and cocaine and other amphetamines. You don't want to do any of that stuff. Like, it's not a good idea. So other than those, we have a list on our website of things to consider with each of the ingredients. But in general, it's a very safe formula that we think almost everybody can benefit from. A couple other people I should just mention: no pregnant women. So if you're pregnant, please no. Yeah. If you're breastfeeding, we've gotten a couple questions about that. Please no. If you are less than 21 years of age in the U.S., nicotine is not available to you. So unfortunately, you cannot have this product as well. We also recommend that, whatever, drugs that you're taking, whether if they're prescription or non-prescription, that you consult with your medical provider. I guess what I'm thinking about is some people that are involved in the psychedelic space specifically. There is one specifically, like the ayahuasca, the DMT derivatives that have an MAOI inside of them as a part of the cocktail, part of the drink. So we don't recommend, if you're trying any of that stuff, to combine it with Blue Cannatine as a result of having MAOI properties. So, and I can't recommend having any of that stuff anyway, because it's all illegal, but you get what I'm saying.
Understood. Dr. Scott, I want to transition now into the final 3 questions, because these are new since the last time you were on the show.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. What excites you most about the health world right now?
I think what excites me most is that there's now more urgency for people. Because of what's happening during the pandemic, people really are like, oh shit, I need to get healthy.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to be sick. And that is a fantastic opportunity for many of us in this world to really develop something that can change how people approach their health. And I'm really excited about that. I'm excited for the work that we're doing in health optimization medicine specifically for this reason, because now we can say, let's focus on your health. Let's focus on your foundation. Let's look at your cells. Let's look at your gut. Let's look at your immune system. Let's optimize all that. So when the next pandemic happens, which is possible, or the next health scare happens, which is going to happen, whatever it might be, you have an immune system and a cellular foundation that's fortified. And now it's not just about putting out fires, I hope it's more about making that shift towards health and making that shift towards focusing on our health. And I am excited about that. I'm truly excited about that shift.
Book that has changed your life.
Which book has changed my life the most? There's so many books that I've enjoyed, although none all that recently, because I've been very busy with keeping myself healthy, especially in the pandemic times. I would say that the book that I've enjoyed the most in the last year is a book that our fellow colleague, Dr. Ted, recommended to me, called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. And I may have mentioned this last time we spoke. I don't remember.
I think so.
Because it still resonates to me, and I go back to it so often. And the other book that I go to often, and maybe I didn't speak about it last time, is called Illusions and the Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. That's a book that I try to read every month these days. And the idea is that we all have inside of us everything that we need. And there's nobody that you need to look to be your Messiah. It's all inside of us. And going back to that book and reminding myself that the external world is just a reflection of your internal world is very, I think, helpful for all of us in these times. And that's something that I've gone back to time and time again. And in this time frame, pandemic times, I continue to come back to.
And for those listening, it's a pretty short book. It's really, really good.
You can get it on YouTube for free. You can.
There you go. There you go. On one more thing, where can people find out more about Blue Cannatine? Maybe try some if they want to get it. Where do they find out more about you?
So Blue Cannatine, the best way is Troscriptions on Instagram. So prescriptions with a TRO to start off with instead of prescriptions, it's Troscriptions. And we named it Troscriptions, because that's really what we think this is. This is a Troscription for your health. And this is a precision dosed pharmaceutical grade formula for optimizing your health and working on those bottlenecks that I described. My personal Instagram is at Dr. Scott Sherr, SCOTTSHERR. And the website is troscriptions.com. My other websites are probably not important today. You can just Google my name and find me on podcasts, and we can talk. Dr. Scott Sherr on Instagram is probably the place I'm most active.
And you're posting more, which is great.
I'm trying. I only like to try to post pertinent information, and that's it's challenging. I want to make sure that it's relevant for people. But yeah, those are the places you can find me most.
Amazing. Dr. Scott, thank you for taking the time again. As always, such a pleasure, my friend.
I thank you, Boomer, and I hope that you and I can see each other soon, and we can at least fist bump, shake hands, or maybe even hug. It'd be nice.
Yeah, exactly. the elbow bump has become very popular these days. So
now it's 6 feet away. No one.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe if you're elbow bumping with like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or something like that. But
right on. There you
go. Awesome. Thank you, my friend, and to all the superhumans listening, have an epic day.